This podcast has been made possible by Plantful.
Hello, this is Kate Bucher, the CFO of HubSpot, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 868.
We raised a little over $600 million in December of 2021. It was a convertible note. That convertible note has an interest rate on it that's a little over 1%. And it gave us a lot of cash on our balance sheet, and by far the strongest balance sheet in the industry. And we're now in a position where not only did we build the storm shelter in advance of this market storm that we're all currently in, but that strong balance sheet that we have is not only a major competitive strength, but allows us to be an offensive weapon.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Tom Fennimore, CFO of Luminar Technologies. The Goldman Sachs M&A transaction team was between conference calls with an embattled client company when it received word that a key member of the company's management team had unexpectedly died. Looking back, Tom Fennimore says the next few months of his early investment banking years at Goldman became a transition point and a period of accelerated learning. The client company, the target of a recent raid, asked Fennimore to join its team for the next few months and help the company complete a transaction that could ultimately thwart the raiders. CFO Tom Fennimore shares that story and much more on today's episode. We begin after this.
Hi, I'm Rowan Tonkin, Chief Marketing Officer at Plantful, and we're a proud sponsor of CFO Thought Leader. At Plantful, we're empowering teams just like yours to drive peak financial performance in every corner of your business. What sets Plantful apart? We have purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. This means we can get you up and running within weeks, and it requires minimal IT involvement. So you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business in your key financial processes. Best of all, you can't outgrow us. We take the pain of growing away with an unmatched ability to scale with you. You have an endless runway with Plantful. See why over 1,300 customers around the world choose Plantful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to plantful.com and see how you can make financial performance a team sport in your business.
Hello, we're speaking with Tom Fennimore, CFO of Luminar Technologies. Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Jack.
Tom, we always begin by asking our CFO guests to look back for us. And we're hoping they'll identify for us some of those experiences that as they look back, they realize really made an impact on how they grew their skills or advanced in their organizations. Anything come to mind for you when we ask for those learning moments?
Sure. There's three in particular that I think played a critical role in where I am now. The first one, going back to my college days and that first decision you make in your career, which is when I graduate from college, where am I going to start off? And I went to Swarthmore College, grew up right outside of Philadelphia, which is where Swarthmore College was located, about 45 minutes from home. I was an engineering and math double major there, so really a quant geek. My summers were not spent working on Wall Street, where I ultimately ended up out of college, but actually working in research at university. My junior year, I was actually up at MIT doing robotics, and I was really on a roll on the road to go get my PhD in engineering. And my two choices at the time were Princeton and MIT. And back in 1997, when I graduated from college, the way that you applied for jobs is you literally did a resume drop, where you dropped your resume into a folder for the companies that were interviewing on campus. And at the time, my senior engineering project was actually building an electric vehicle from scratch. And there were certain elements of the business world that were of interest to me. And I did a little research. One of the companies I dropped my resume into was Goldman Sachs. And at that time, I was clueless on Wall Street and finance and never took a finance class. I went to my on-campus interview at Goldman Sachs, and it was a disaster. For some reason, I only had one suit, which was an olive green suit. And I had no idea what finance was. And there was one individual at Goldman, he was a Swarthmore alum, who called me up afterwards and said, "We're going to invite you to the, second round of interviews, which you actually have to go to New York and interview with, 20 or so people. We're only doing that based upon the quality of resume. I was, as I mentioned before, double engineering math, great GPA, honor, showed a lot of initiative, captain of the football team. But he said two pieces of advice. One is just be open and honest. You don't know finance. It's something you can learn. Try not to, go in there and, just be open. I don't know anything. I'm a smart guy. I can get it, etc. The second thing he said is, you got to go get a new suit, right? You can't show up in an olive green suit, and they go navy blue, go buy one. And so it was great advice, went up there, clearly did a good job. And I decided that the Goldman Analyst program was 2 years. I thought it would be a great introduction into the business world. I ultimately decided to try it out for a couple years, and I was there for nearly 20 years. So I clearly liked it. One of my first jobs out of college at Goldman, and I moved around, worked with a lot of great people, learned a lot, was actually working on the part of Goldman that took companies public during the dot-com boom in the late 90s. And I learned a lot for that has been very relevant to my time at Luminar. And we'll come back and talk about that at some point later on the podcast. But my first, I would say that first critical milestone was trying to give Goldman Sachs a shot. And it was a great decision. I learned a lot there. I worked with some very smart people. The part of the job that I loved the most was eventually you tended to focus on an industry group. For me, it was automotive. And you would effectively go around and meet with CEOs and CFOs and other senior members of the management team. And ultimately, you would want to have a strategic discussion about where they wanted to take their business and how you could help, whether that was with mergers and acquisitions, financings, et cetera. But you really had to understand a client's business. You had to understand the industry, and it taught me to think strategically.
In what types of ways, really? And this has been really interesting so far for us, Tom. Thank you.
What were the challenges? Where was the industry headed? What was growing? What was not? What were the company's weaknesses? What were their strengths? And what were the potential strategic moves that a senior management team could do to help improve their business? And that's the mindset that Goldman trained, how Goldman trained you to think. We were never a big bank where we'd go in there and say, hey, I got a multi-billion-dollar balance sheet. Can I lend you $1 billion? We differentiated ourselves competitively by being the best strategic thinkers. And that was a skill set. That was probably the best skill set that I developed at Goldman. The second most critical milestone, and in my career, I've learned that crises or opportunities are large systematic shocks to the world, those are very opportune times to examine your career, think about how the world is going to change, and what can you do as an individual to take advantage of the opportunities that these shocks are going to create. So don't panic, think strategically, what can you do to take advantage of it? And that shock came after the 2008 financial crisis. At that point, I was covering the automotive industry. And at that point, I think we all remember how awful the world felt coming out of 2008 and into 2009. And at that point, Goldman wanted to grow its China office, and I had the opportunity to go over there and help build out and lead their industrial business in China. My wife and I were also at the point, my wife was a prosecutor for the SEC in New York. So, being a Wall Street banker, that created some interesting dynamics. Luckily, we never crossed paths professionally. But at that point, it was the right time for us to start our family. So at the end of 2009, we decided to move to Beijing, China. And I spent 3 years living there. As an Americans, and at the time, the world was becoming a lot more global. Americans had, I would think, an innate understanding about how business is done in Europe. China was becoming an increasingly part of not only the automotive industry, but the world. But to many Americans, China was a little bit of a black box. And I wanted to go over there, cover the industry, live in Beijing for 3 years, and it was an amazing experience. I learned so much and developed a skill set that has been very valuable to my career. The third critical milestone was actually the start of COVID. Once again, another systematic shock to the world. And at that time, I've been covering the automotive industry for nearly 20 years. And the auto industry was at an inflection point. To a certain extent, there was a rapid introduction of new technologies. And there were certain times as an automotive banker where I would have to travel to Silicon Valley and talk technology. But at the same time, there was also this rapid restructuring that needed to happen. As you shift to new technologies, there are going to be companies that are left behind and companies that would need to go bankrupt or have to undergo significant restructuring. So there were certain times where instead of being a technology banker and talking about how to grow your business, I would have to be a restructuring banker and have to go to bankruptcy court down in a lot of times Delaware with my clients. And as I looked at my career entering COVID, having the discussion about how to grow the cutting edge technologies was a lot more interesting than the bankruptcy or the restructuring and some of the tough transactions and conversations with clients you have to associate with that. And one of the skill sets that I built up over 20 years of covering the automotive industry is you knew where the industry was going. You knew what the next key technology trends were going to be. And you developed a skill set to differentiate the companies in a certain technology area to understand who had the best chance of winning and being successful. One of the companies I worked with while I was at Goldman was Mobileye. They were a leader in the active safety space. We spent a lot of time on the banking side working with them to raise money, take them public. But Goldman also made a principal investment in Mobileye that was very lucrative for the firm, much more lucrative than what we made on the banking fees. And so at that point, I saw the world was changing. Technology was becoming increasingly important. The switching costs of leaving banking were probably at their lowest point, given COVID would create a downturn in the business. And an opportunity presented itself where a very interesting company, Luminar, was looking for a CFO. It was in a space that I knew was going to be big. And, we'll talk more about Luminar in a second. They make these things called LiDAR, and it was related to safe autonomy and making the vehicle safer. And that was something that really resonated to me. So I made the bold decision. My wife and I since have had two young boys. At the time, they were in second grade and about to start pre-K. So the switching cost for my boys was relatively low. It's not like they were teenagers and had their social system decide. And so I moved across the country in the middle of COVID to become the CFO of Luminar.
Well, you connected the dots for us there very nicely. It's a wonderful overview for us. And I think, just coming up in that environment, I mean, and I'll when we get to Luminar and learn more about it, we'll want to understand how you acclimated yourself after so many years in sort of the banking world, investment banking world. But just stepping back in time, I'm just wondering if there were certain milestones, and particularly at Goldman Sachs, where, 17 years at Goldman Sachs,
Yep.
maybe more? As you're coming up, there was a time perhaps, and maybe it had to do with the automotive responsibilities as you grew into that role. There was a time where the more senior partner said, nope, it's all yours. And he stepped out of the room, or she stepped out of the room, and there you were dealing with, perhaps the C-suite of a particular company, and let it be known that the discussion that was about to take place was all your responsibility in some way. I don't know, but that sort of passing of the baton where you felt the responsibility fall on your shoulders. How did it happen for you?
So I'll give you two important transition points, and then one interesting anecdote. What Goldman Sachs did very well during my career is they gave young, ambitious, and capable people, they would let them grow. And particularly during the time period that I was there, Goldman was growing, and there were natural opportunities for you as a young banker to step up. And the first thing you do is, a lot of times you would be on a transaction team executing, let's call it a merger and acquisition. And I remember this one deal in particular. It was with a company up in Toronto, and it was a very sad situation. They were in the process of being raided, which is when another company goes hostile for you. One of Goldman's most important businesses is what we call anti-raid, and that's where you defend the company. Goldman was and is the best on the street on doing that, but those are rather intensive deals. In the middle of this transaction, unfortunately, a very senior member of our client passed away in the middle of it. And it was in between conference calls. And it was a horrible situation. And the client called me up and effectively asked me to move to Toronto for the next 2 months to replace him. Because at that time, we were in the middle of the deal. I got to know the company very well. This person who passed away was in the middle of the transaction. And it reflected in a good way for me internally at Goldman that the client had enough faith in me to go up there, but it was also an amazing experience and kind of gave me an opportunity to not only step on this transaction, but literally live with the client for a couple months in the middle of a transaction. So I think that is an example of one, call it transition point, where you kind of go to the next level. The other was the managing director who was covering the automotive industry resigned when I was a junior VP. And the firm came to me and gave me a battlefield promotion and said, Jason just left. We want you to do this, and we'll see how you do. And depending upon how you do, we may or may not go find somebody to replace you. So I was kind of given leadership of a sector at a relatively young age, which was great for me. One of the challenges that created for me was I was still in my 20s at the time, the late 20s, and a lot of times you're going in front of corporate boards who have a lot of older individuals, a lot of gray hairs, particularly in the automotive industry, where you have people who have been at companies for 30 years and like to see and value seniority. I have a little bit of a baby face, and so I remember going in front of one of those board meetings, and for a client going through a very important transaction, had a great relationship with the CEO, CFO, which is why they hired me. And I remember after the board meeting, they called me up and said, "Hey, look, you did a great job. Board loves you, wants to do the advice. I have one small request, which is." They several of them made a comment about this guy's too young. He looks too young. They feel a little more comfortable with somebody with a little more gray hair in the room. Just somebody with a little bit more experience. And so it was great to be given a lot of responsibility at a young age. But there's also, I would say, some challenges that created as well. And you try not to take it personally and move on.
Excellent. Great. You came through for us. Two really great stories. So thank you for those. We do want to ask you about Luminar, but we're wondering why you didn't find a Luminar sooner. There were other opportunities that clearly came along and you said, no, thanks. This one, finally, you jump to the operations side and step into the CFO office. What set this one apart, really?
For me, it was really a combination of the timing factors that I've talked about before, but most importantly, I did have CFO opportunities other times in my careers. And it comes back to that dichotomy in the automotive space, which I talked about before. There are certain companies that have a product set that have macro headwind pressure. The industry is changing rapidly, and these are companies that are going to struggle to adapt. And those opportunities, from a personal perspective, are less exciting to me. One of the reasons why I really like Luminar is this is a new product. It has never gone on vehicles before. There is a strong and compelling reason why it should be on practically every vehicle made. There were a lot of companies that are trying to make this product, and the company or the companies that would be successful in this space are going to be very big companies. And to me, that is a very exciting journey. For a lot of the times that I covered the automotive industry, there wasn't that technology growth opportunity there. It really only developed in the automotive industry, I would say, over the last 10 years. And it took me a while to kind of find the right opportunity that had that strong growth profile, as well as the right team and the right fit and the right time in my career to make that switch.
Excellent. I want to just come out and ask the question then, because our listeners are probably, tell us what does it do exactly? What sets this company apart? And that's my question. Tell us about this company. What does it do? And what are its offerings really today?
Yeah. And so we make these products called LiDARs. And the way that I describe it to my two young boys is we basically shoot lasers out of vehicles to do real-time 3D mapping of the world around it. So the car can drive safer because you know precisely where everything is in front of you, as well as enable autonomy for when the technology is ultimately ready for autonomy. So not only do we make that LiDAR hardware, we make the software associated with it, as well as certain products that our LiDAR enables, like 3D mapping products, which is something that we recently announced. We already have products on the road. We launched with our initial OEM last year, and we're preparing to launch with Volvo later this year. And so Volvo's flagship SUV, their EX90, every vehicle they sell starting later this year is going to have our technology with it, because it substantially improves the safety of the vehicle. Volvo's the brand name most synonymous with safety. And so that was a very important win for us. We're also on other vehicle makers like Mercedes-Benz, Nissan, Polestar, certain other technology partners like NVIDIA, Mobileye, and also on commercial trucking clients like Daimler Truck. So that's the technology. There's going to be rapid adoption. Luminar has by far the most wins in the industry in terms of automakers that are going to put our technology on the vehicle. And I knew from covering the automotive industry that LiDAR was going to be big. But with any new technology, I wouldn't meet with a lot of these startup companies. All of them would come in and pitch you with PowerPoint presentations, why their technology is the best in the world. To me, the biggest differentiator that I used as a banker to determine if a company was real is, are automakers making a conscious decision to buy that technology and put on their vehicle? And a company's view of their technology, it's important. A third party's view on that technology is important, but all of it is irrelevant if none of the customers are ultimately going to choose to use that technology. And so the automakers were ultimately going to select the winner. And when I kind of heard through the industry grapevine that Luminar won Volvo, to me, that was an important indicator of the company's future success. And particularly with a brand name like Volvo, that is the perfect first customer and launch customer for a company like Luminar that is really making products that make the vehicle much more safe.
Let me just quickly, you arrive in 2020 shortly before the IPO, or can you give us a little bit of a time frame there?
Oh yeah, it was. The IPO wasn't even on the radar until after I joined. My personal underwriting of the situation was, you put your head down, execute 2 to 3 years. That's the right time to IPO. But what happened is that this market window emerged shortly after I joined Luminar. Austin Russell, our CEO, and I had a very big strategic discussion is, are we ready? And ultimately, we concluded that there is a window here. I learned from my time at Goldman, remember working on IPOs during the dot-com bubble and then ultimate bust, that this window wasn't going to be open long. And we ultimately decided to sprint and take advantage of it. We raised over $1 billion, which was very smart. And, kind of hit the ground, joined a month, and then it was back to taking companies public again, which was, really played to my skill set and allowed me to get acclimated to the company very quickly.
We always like to ask you about your lines of sight into the organization. We're wondering what the numbers you look at each morning are. What would those be?
So for me, it's really two sets of numbers. Like any CFO, I look at what's happening in the business today. How many sensors have we produced? How many have we sold? What is our cash spend rate? And what is our other revenue coming in at, as well as other cost items? And that's something that any CFO looks at, we pay attention to. But really what we're looking to optimize, because we're a growth company, and in particular, our revenue is going to be ramping up very rapidly when we launch with Volvo later this year. We're really building a business that is focused more on the medium and longer term, because that's when our revenue is really going to scale. One of my biggest benefits at Luminar is our largest shareholder is our CEO and founder, Austin Russell, who is 27. And that gives us the luxury to focus on the long term and what is right for the business for longer term value creation. And while we always focus on the short term and making sure we're managing what we can do there, how we're going to create real value at Luminar is what the next few years is going to look at. And for us, there's really three key components. One is, how much business have we won? And one of the unique aspects of the automotive industry is you have very good visibility of what your revenue is going to look like over the next, call it 3 to 7 years. Once you win a piece of business from an automaker, it typically takes about 3 years to design that vehicle. So you have 3-year visibility into when that revenue is going to come. And then once you get to that is called start of production, that vehicle is typically in production for anywhere from 5 to 7 and sometimes 10 years. And so you're going to be on that platform, you're designed into it. And as long as you do a good job, you have very good visibility on what that revenue is going to look like over that platform life. And so for us at Luminar, we know over the next, call it for the rest of the decade, we have a pretty good sense of our revenue visibility. And as a company, we're in a land grab, right? There's not a lot of LiDAR on vehicles today. We want to win those initial platforms. That is important to us. And then more importantly, we need to be prepared to produce those units, both from making sure we have the right engineering resources in place to work with our customers to design our product into the system, as well as having the manufacturing capacity in place. So yes, I look at a lot of what I would call the traditional short-term metrics, but the longer term is where we spend most of the time improving, optimizing, measuring, and making sure that we're prepared. So the first one is the volume. Then from that, it's the unit economics. What is our bill of material or our BOM? Where are we in our supplier negotiations? We use a contract manufacturing strategy. Where are we with our contract manufacturers, making sure that they're optimized those costs? And so after you kind of, maximize the revenue and the specific sensors you're going to produce, it's the unit economics. And then finally, because we are a young and growing company, that operating expense, we want to make sure that we're putting in place what we need to do to execute, because we can't fail on these initial launches. But at the same time, we don't want to add bureaucracy and fat into the system. And so we want to make sure that if this is a person or a cost we need to add and it's going to be permanent, let's bring that on. But at the same time, there's a lot of one-time costs that we need to use, whether, if you need to set up a facility, you got to have a lot of costs and a lot of people associated building out that facility. Once it's built out, you don't need those resources anymore. So maybe you should use more contractors for that. And so optimizing that cost structure for the longer term is also a very important thing. So at Luminar, I need to focus both on the short term, but more importantly, optimizing that medium term and longer term financial model from our perspective.
Yeah, so nice overview. Thank you for those. I wonder about how you manage your team. And again, this is really your first CFO chapter that's unfolded over the last few years. You had the opportunity to look inside many other organizations and understand how they use their finance talent, had some takeaways from that experience. But maybe you did things differently. Maybe you realized, again, when you look to optimize the cost structure and have the facility management understand why it might be better to use contractors, have you structured it in such a way where your FP&A people are embedded or other parts of finance?
So a few things. So one, when I first joined as a CFO, I had a very honest assessment of what my skill set was. What was I good at? What was I not good at? And, it was my first time going into the CFO role. So I brought in a good chief accounting officer to help me build out the accounting organization. I brought in, the head of IR from Intel to actually not only be the head of IR for us, but also to lead our FP&A organization. And then I also moved some good athletes, around as well. So the person who was running FP&A when I joined, a very, very good individual. We had a need to help him go figure out the finances and help grow one of the parts at Luminar. So moving him around. That's one of the things that I learned at Goldman. Goldman was very good at hiring smart people, moving them around. The other thing that we're starting to do is, to borrow a football term, we've been building through free agency here at Luminar. Goldman was very good at building out at the draft, hiring good athletes out of college and then training them and going them around. That's one of our focus areas on 2023 is starting to do that and build for the longer term, which I think is very important. But from my perspective, a lot of it was building the team below me. particularly to complement my skill set and to a certain extent, giving them the right focus areas, giving them the right OKRs, empowering them to go out and run the team there are, being there when they need you, holding them accountable for what they need to be accountable for. But I think a lot of it was building the right team around me to help me. And, right now I feel like I have the right team in place, and, it allows me to think more strategically about where we want to grow our business, not only from the finance side. It's also enabled me to start taking on some responsibilities that a traditional CFO doesn't normally take. We're building out Luminar China. Given my experience in China, I'm playing a leadership role in that. We are looking to get into, I oversee our business development team, given I used to call on a lot of these automotive clients. So helping our business development team think through who are the customers we should focus on, where are our priorities, how do we cover them, how do we kind of, convert our discussions into a win, using my skill set that I developed as in the investment banking industry, bringing that and using that on the BD team. And so there are areas where, as a CFO, I'm kind of stepping out the traditional roles and helping Luminar grow. And I'm able to do that because I built a great team around me.
I do want to just ask you about talent at large and whether you have a mindset regarding the human capital costs and compensation, and whether as a finance leader, you're playing a part in helping influence that and helping the decision-making related to talent. It's expensive. Churn is, losing people can devastate a small company. What, in regards to your talent mindset, what would you share for the overall company?
So two responses to that. One is we've been blessed at Luminar where our employee turnover is well below the industry averages, particularly for a tech company. I think a big part of that is the very credible success that we have in front of us. The people at Luminar, while at any company, there are certain challenges we face. But I think overall, Austin has done a good job of building a good team, and our turnover has been well below the industry average. We're also, particularly with the pullback we're seeing in the tech industry, the caliber of talent we've been able to hire over the last several months has increased significantly. The big tech companies are pulling back. Some of the automotive companies are shutting down their autonomy operations. A lot of our competitors are running out of cash, and they look at Luminar as a company that has real business we're launching, real technology, a strong balance sheet, and a very bright future. So we've been able to attract a very high caliber talent over the last several months. And you combine that with a low turnover rate, and look, we're always, looking to hire the best talent, and particularly for a growing organization, that's important. But we have never faced an issue at Luminar of not being able to hire the right individual for an open role that we have. In terms of compensation, once again, going back to some of the lessons that I personally learned from the dot-com bust is those companies that went public in the late 90s used employee options as their primary compensation tool. And as the stock, the tech bubble collapsed, those options became very far out of the money, and it created an employee motivation issue and caused a lot of employee turnover. We paid our employees primarily in options before we went public, but when we went public, we moved to paying our employees in RSUs. And we prepared for a sharp market correction in case the 2020, 2021 strong market turned out to be a bubble, and that bubble bursted, which it has. And we took steps to prepare for that. And one of them is how we paid our employees. Yes, the RSUs that we gave our employees have less value than what they were a year ago, just from a function of the stock price going down. But there's still a large amount of value there. And our employees tend to recognize that Luminar is going to be a long-term winner here. They see the credible path we're on, and a lot of them are willing to be patient because they see that credible upside coming as soon as the market settles down and we execute on our plan.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Good insight there for us. So appreciate it. We are now up to our finance strategic moment question, where we ask you just to share, and you've shared many with us, Tom, so thank you. But one moment of insight from the past, a strategic moment of insight that you experienced and acted on or responded to. Maybe it was a risk that you avoided. Maybe it was an opportunity that was pursued.
The one that jumps to my mind is the end of 2021, so a little over a year ago. The market was in the early stages of its downturn. The Fed was just about to start raising interest rates. And I had a gut feel that the market was going to take a sharp downturn. Our stock, was lower than where it was 6-12 months ago, but was still at a level where we had the ability to go out and raise a ton of capital. And so we raised a little over $600 million in December of 2021. It was a convertible note. That convertible note has an interest rate on it that's a little over 1%. And it gave us a lot of cash on our balance sheet, and by far the strongest balance sheet in the industry. And we're now in a position where not only did we build the storm shelter in advance of this market storm that we're all currently in, but that balance sheet, that strong balance sheet that we have, is not only a major competitive strength, but allows us to be an offensive weapon. And what I mean by an offensive weapon is we go out there and we're able to demonstrate to our customers that we have staying power. And while we're not profitable today, we have more than enough cash plus a very healthy cushion to get there. And a lot of our other LiDAR competitors are going to run out of cash very shortly here. We share an analysis with them. The other thing it does is it allows us to act opportunistically, whether that's with acquisitions or to do other strategic partnerships. And so one of the things we did last year is we did an acqui-hire of a 3D mapping company. That's a technology that fits very well with us. We were able to pick up a great team, a great initial software code at a very attractive price because we built that financial wherewithal, which allowed us to act opportunistically. And so, look, with anything in life, there was a certain element of luck associated with that decision. But it was, also 20 years of capital market experience where you had a gut feel, you lived through the dot-com bust, and it just felt like the right time to make that strategic finance move we did to raise that much capital right as the markets were about to enter a major storm.
Hi, it's Jack Sweeney. Hope you're enjoying our talk with CFO Tom Fennimore of Luminar Technologies. There he mentioned it again, the dot-com experience. Again, this class of CFOs, this 2020 class of CFOs, or those CFOs who have entered the C-suite within the last 2 years, began their careers really in the dot-com world, in that strange age of evaluations. And interestingly, there's a point of comparison with this period that we've now entered, the early days of the dot-coms and the early days of AI. As many of our CFO guests have already pointed out to us, we're just getting started. And what an interesting company, a Luminar with LiDAR technology, as Tom explained. We'll now return to the mentoring round with CFO Tom Fennimore. Now we're going to jump to what we refer to as the mentoring round, where we ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. You were telling us earlier about your arrival. We talked a little bit about your arrival there, and that there were other opportunities that you might have stepped into, but you stepped into one here. You seem to be have been very prepared for what was in store. At the same time, there must have been something, if you could go back in time at that first couple of months you were there in 2020, if there was something piece of advice you would give yourself, something you'd whisper in your own ear, what would it have been?
For me, I think I kind of joined Luminar and hit the ground running. And as I said, quickly went back into investment banking mode, trying to take this company public. We moved so quickly to go public, and, to a certain extent, we didn't have a lot of the infrastructure in place to help support us. Having known that we were going to go public so quickly, I would have started to put in place the infrastructure day one of where we, when I joined. Now, we've been lucky. We've been able to do everything the right way and manage that process. But knowing we were going to move as fastly as we did at Luminar going public, I wish I would have done more things on day one as opposed to day 100.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side for us. Wondering if you have a personal habit, a part of a routine that you're known for, something you do that sets you apart from others. This might be something a family member would tell us about you. That's just what Tom does. He's always done it that way. Anything?
One of the things that I have learned to do, particularly over the last few months, is trust my gut a little bit more. And we only use about 10% of our brain, and you kind of build a wealth of experience, and that could be from hiring a certain person or making a certain business decision. But I think we all have that little thing in here that says you should do this, and sometimes it's inexplainable why it's there. But I've kind of learned to trust mine there. Now, that doesn't mean I do the analysis to support the major decisions and talk to people and gather as much advice. But really trusting that gut and that instinct that you've had and that you've kind of developed, it's I've learned to rely on it more, as particularly over the last few months. And you can only do that after you have a certain amount of experience, and so I don't want to say that everybody should do that, but a lot of times we have that initial instinct, and we should learn to at least trust it or explore it more.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We always like to ask for a book recommendation. Doesn't have to be a business book. Might be something you escape with. Don't know. Anything?
0 to 1. It's something I recently read. It's about the most difficult part of building a company is to taking it from the start to one, right? Taking it from nothing to building that initial product. It is something that Austin actually recommended I read. It's something that I'm going to encourage my boys to read. And it was very... I really didn't realize the overarching point of that book, which is building something for the first time is extremely difficult. And once you get from 0 to 1, going from 1 to a much larger number becomes a lot easier. And I feel like at Luminar, we've now just crossed that 1 point, and we're now built and about to experience explosive growth. So kind of experience some of the key tales from that book firsthand.
And it's Peter Thiel, of course, and Blake Masters are the authors.
Yep.
We're up to our final question. We want you to look forward for us, Tom, just 12 months and share what your priorities are as the CFO of Luminar.
For us, the most important goal over the next 12 months, not only for me as the CFO, but for Luminar overall, is to successfully launch this Volvo program. We already launched our initial program, but the fact that we're going to be on every next generation EX90, we need to do that flawlessly. And so a year from now, if we did that, within budget, having the right cost structure, the right unit economics, we're going to have a very successful year here at Luminar.
Tom Fennimore, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack, for having me. I had a great time.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.